Hi, John. It's nice to see you.
Good to see you, Robert. Hold on, I gotta just get this screen out of the way.
Take your time with the screens, no problem at
Okay,
all.
got
Uh,
it.
I wanted to talk to you about your day one experience, and where did you start with this? Where did you hear about it, and then what was your first reaction to the day one program?
Well, I heard about it through Susan Scarlett, who I had originally gotten to know when she was volunteered for our annual symposium that we do for the Parkinson's Movement Disorder Center here at the University of Maryland in Baltimore. Her aunt actually is a neurologist and movement disorder specialist in the DC area in Washington. I think it was GW Hospital. And she recommended to our director that she might consider Susan's story for that they had just made this movie and about the long 64-mile swim that her nephew had taken, to bring awareness to Parkinson's disease. Anyway, cut to make sort of a long story short, I got to know Susan through that event, and we kept in touch. And she, along with another person that was part of our community, Julie Walker, I think um, Julie and Susan connected in a more personal way at some point during the whole process. Anyway, Julie told me that Susan was interested in talking with me about this new program, this new guy she was involved with. I didn't know anything about that at that point, but she and Julie said that she thought you'd be a good candidate for a presentation at our next annual symposium. And as it turned out, you were. We invited you and as a group, and you turned out to be a big hit. Everybody enjoyed the session a lot, even though it was still COVID time and it was virtual, our second virtual performance. So it was very powerful. So it was after that through Susan again, that I heard that she'd been involved in this program. She felt day one. What's that mean? I said, day one. I mean, this is like day 365 or something like that of my times 10, for my days in Parkinson's. She says, oh, it's a new start, and it's this guy named Robert is a doctoral student at University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and he has put together a program for people with Parkinson's to improve the quality of life through the use of improv, specifically the improv techniques. And so that was when I first really started thinking about this as a possibility for myself. So
What did that address? We'll go to the improv side. You came to it not knowing a lot about improv, and then something seemed to have clicked with you. What did it address? What were the gaps in maybe your Parkinson's treatment or life that improv seems to have helped with?
well, I was cautious about it at first. In fact, I remember when we were talking about your participating in our symposium, I said, well, let me just observe one of these sessions. And you were very kind. And you said, well, it's not how we do it here in this program. John said, we'd really like you to jump into being a participant. And myself, I'm thinking, no way can I do that. I mean, I've never been a performer. I've never considered myself to be any sort of a comic. I just didn't, I thought I'd feel out of place. But I sort of, you were so encouraging about it. And Susan was also very encouraging about it. That I said, okay, I'll try this. I'll try out this Jam for Joy thing that you're doing. And I dropped into that just to see what that was about. And I was very surprised and quite pleased to find that, number one, I really did enjoy it. And number two, it was not at all threatening to me. It felt like it was a safe, you created a safe space for us to work in. And I particularly felt I needed that feeling of a safe space just so that I could feel like I could allow myself to be spontaneous, allow that not to be sort of like reined in, which I've done with a lot of things throughout my life, but allow myself instead to come out. And I think that that's even more important as a Parkinson's patient of almost 15 years standing. Is that, Parkinson's closes me in as it does many people. My face loses its mobility. It's like I have to think about smiling sometimes. I'm not mad. I've got Parkinson's. Yeah, that sort of thing. And in the first couple, I went to 2 or 3 of these Joy for Jams, or Jam for Joys, excuse me. I felt like every time when I went in, I was feeling sort of closed up. By the time I came out, I was feeling much more wide open. And I really attribute that to the gift that you gave me and gave us as a group, as a collective. First in the Jam for Joys, but second in the 6-week clinical trial that I participated in, where we took the improv techniques and we we used them over a 6-week period, 2 sessions per week, and really built, I think, a collective safe space for all of us to grow in. So that's sort of a long way of getting to the answer. I really feel like I've been able to open up more as a result of this. I feel more open inside. I feel more open outside. It's just been really a blessing for me.
I appreciate hearing all of that. And the ensemble building elements are definitely an inherent part of improv, in my opinion, when it's done to its highest good. As you mentioned, the comedy side of it is a well-known, probably much more well-known. And I think that performative element does exactly like you said. It keeps people out thinking that's not for me. I'm glad you recognized and gave yourself the opportunity to find what is a safe, kind, respectful place and non-threatening to express more of yourself. That's great. Now, as we turn toward day one, we include improv elements, but of course, that's not all we do. I noted in your answers, you said, well, I want to learn, you said something about when you joined up with day one, well, I want to do more improv because you had just come off the clinical trial. Yeah. And then you find out that there's this thing called the hero's journey and a lot of writing involved. What was your reaction to that?
Well, I was intrigued by that. By once I understood the 12 sort of steps in the cycle, then we'd be exploring life or our journey with Parkinson's in a different way through each of those steps. And from the very first, I guess, topic, suggested topic, which was what were our feelings, our beliefs, our dreams before Parkinson's, I really took a hard look at myself and I said, which I hadn't done in a long time. So looking back, what was I really thinking, doing, feeling before that? And I came up with, I think, a pretty honest assessment of myself that I felt good with, but it also left me feeling vulnerable, that I had somehow sort of, maybe I'd exposed too much of myself, to whoever might be reading this. But I felt because of my experience with the improv sessions you had run in with a 6-week trial, that I would be safe. I could be vulnerable. I wouldn't be open to somebody else's coming back and trying to hammer me because of something that I'd said or the way I said it.
Right. That's a good point. The writing can be quite vulnerable, like you say. And the idea of vulnerability tends to strike people as, a position of either weakness or being threatened, right? What do you think about the ideas we've explored through some of Brene Brown's work, that vulnerability being courage? Does that make sense to you at this point?
It does. It doesn't mean I always have the courage to be as vulnerable as I would like to be sometimes, but it makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
Everything that we touched with Brene Brown, both during the day one and also in some of your subsequent work, I've really felt, drawn to that.
Me too. I think it's a nice, we try to find all these corollaries, these lines, and draw them together to provide exactly what you're saying, a safe and brave space for us to be, our most courageous self. Courage, the idea we've talked about, is not the absence of fear, but the recognition of fear and going anyway, right? So, you demonstrate that. You face these things rather than tuck them away or decide not to go at all, isolate. This is a place to become a hero. And let's talk about that word for a minute, because it hangs a lot of people up, and it seems it did too. You wrote here about being considered a hero, because I asked you all to consider that. You said, I don't really qualify to be called a hero. I haven't done anything especially out of the ordinary. Does that sound right for where you were starting out?
It definitely was where I started out. And in fact, the reason that whole thing came up for me was that one of my friends, who I told about this before I started the hero's journey, before I started the program, when I said that was one of the pieces of it, she said she considered me a superhero or a hero because of my response to PD. And that's what led to the words that you just attributed to me, that I didn't feel that way. I wasn't doing anything that anybody else is doing. But over the course of the 12 steps, and sort of having to look at different aspects of myself, sometimes quite concretely and sometimes very metaphorically, I just really came to terms with some things about myself that made me feel like, well, just maybe I can consider myself a hero. And it took a lot for me to get there, I'll tell you.
Well, it did. We talked about your process with the writing, and sometimes taking, longer, and hopefully you heard the grace for me to say, take the time you need to get there. That, I think you and at least one or two other classmates, when we got to the ordeal, which is like a cave, which is, the big thing that you're going to face, weren't sure what was going to be there or even about the validity of going in to check it out. And you had a tremendous response in the ordeal. Do you recall some of that and what it meant for you to go in there and to explore that part for yourself?
Sure. I think it was session 8. I think it was 7 or 8.
Yes.
Not sure the number exactly, but I know the approach to the cave, the one before that, I realized that, I didn't even know where I was.
Right.
I didn't know where the cave was. And I had to sort of like go back to the beginning and reassess to see what is this call that I've been, or what is this, call that is bringing me forward? What am I coming to? And so I got to the cave, the entrance to the cave, and like with great trepidation internally, I stepped into it. And this is where the writing just sort of took over. It became sort of, it wrote itself. I hadn't reconsidered really any of this, but what I found in there, and this is again all metaphorically, but I encountered these string of demons along the way that I gave names to. And each one I could see represented some different aspect of myself, like the aspect of, the demon of not being good enough, or the demon of I'm too tired, or the demon of it's because of Parkinson's. Or I call them demons because they're negative thought processes or attitudes that inhibit me in growing in my life. And I saw on the other side of that, because we consider both allies as well as allies as well as demons or enemies. The demons obviously were my enemies, and my allies were my angels. And these were both people that I could see in my life, as well as the more energetic angels that exist inside of me as well. That once they are called a battle, where I've got a battle going on, which you could happen in my desk here any minute now, where the two forces, begin to assert themselves. That's where it goes. And when I got to the very end of that cave, and again, this is a metaphor, well, I saw a single candle at the back end of the cave. It was just flickering in dimness. And as I came to the end of the candle, the demon was not even something you could recognize, but it was just this cloud, this shroud that came and enveloped the whole candle in front of me, and the light flickered out. And that was my death, the death that being the final, the fear of death being my final demon that sits over all our shoulders. No matter, it's there. Someday it's going to come and sit on my shoulder. Right now it's still behind my shoulder, but it's that fear of death and fear of the unknown that I think is that keeps me and probably others from fully trusting. And that was I think that was the most impactful piece of writing maybe I've ever done in my life. And I've done some writing, and I consider myself in generally to have been a good writer all through my life. But that really meant a lot to me. And then the follow-up steps of the, what was the next one?
The next one was the reward, seizing the sword.
Seizing the sword, that's right. And recognizing that and sort of reliving the ordeal and recognizing from an external point of view rather than metaphorically from an internal point, just what my value really was. And I could put a label on it more clearly. What was really interesting for me is I didn't know from week to week what the next week was going to ask for me. And so I ended each piece of the note of, well, even though I may not have stayed there, where do I go from here? Anticipating what's next. And I love the writing piece. So that was to me was the most impactful piece of it all for me, of the entire process.
You definitely leaned in and were one of the leaders in the class in your writing. And I wanted to ask you specifically about metaphors, because they seem to be something that you really grasped onto, and you spoke several times as you were describing this metaphorically. What do metaphors do for you, both in writing maybe and in oral explanation, and how do they help you maybe make sense of the world in a broader way?
Well, that's a good question, because it's easy to say something in real concrete terms, like, I'm afraid I'll die someday, which is, and instead sort of see it as a demon that's surrounding my light, that's going to extinguish my light, from which eventually there will be no, physical resurrection of any sort. I think I just missed the heart of your question. What was that again?
That's okay. The value of metaphors is what we're looking for. You seem to embrace them. You were one of the leaders in the class about regularly adding them to your writing, because metaphors can be a difficult concept for people to grasp. I had to work really hard, even as a writer for many years. I had to work really hard to wrap my mind around the idea of, love is a rose. And now you're like, okay, two disparate ideas. That's what they are, not, weakening it as a simile. Love is like a rose. You
Right.
really use them frequently and seemingly to great aid to your work. It seemed to help your workflow.
Yeah, thank you. And what also helped me a lot in having, I guess, giving me sort of the oomph to keep on using them was I got a lot of good feedback in the notes from people who read especially my early writings. One of my metaphors that just sort of popped out, and I loved it, and it just sort of really seemed to resonate with a lot of people was early on was the path of a person on Parkinson's who thinks their life is going in one direction. It's like, I got on a train in Washington, think I'm going to New York, and instead I fall asleep when the conductor comes through conducting tickets. I'm going to Chicago.
Right.
I'm not on the train I thought I was going to be on. And not only that, but there's no stops along the way. It's like we go through Pittsburgh and I keep saying, oh, waiting for us to stop and I'll get off here. Whoops, goodbye, Pittsburgh. And there goes Pittsburgh. And that's sort of like for me, the journey, this slowly developing process of Parkinson's. The impact of Parkinson's upon my life is always, I even hate to say it this way, it's, going down a little bit, down a little bit, down. I hate to think of it that way, but, a lot of people would. My quality of life is going down. In some ways, it's changed. In other ways, it's improved, I think. I think it's improved my ability to I think, acknowledge that, yes, I am not an invulnerable man, yet I can still find joy in this world. And I can be of service to other people, despite, what's going on with me with Parkinson's disease.
I think that's such an important point, and we didn't do a ton of it in this class, but it does tend to come up in Parkinson's communities, maybe not enough in my opinion, but what is Parkinson's and what is aging? And I think that's,
Right.
Partially a good thing about framing within the hero's journey, because what the hero's journey does, it puts our story against thousands of years of stories of people who have lived and died, complete cycles, and recognize that, we're, maybe calm our egos a little bit to say we're not the only ones, and
Yeah.
recognize we're part of something larger. And therefore, like you said, the demon of blaming Parkinson's, giving therefore Parkinson's all the power, as opposed to saying, well, at this age, this is part of a natural decline. And as the certain things decline, then you said this well too, other things evolve and open up. You are given
Right.
gifts if you are capable of seeing them and receiving them, right? That
Right.
come with age, and maybe even giving up certain parts that, Parkinson's took away. It's like, well, now I have more of a time to focus on this now that I see it, because maybe you didn't see it when
Yeah.
you're so busy with the other thing, right?
Right. Right. What's there to step into the void, so to speak? So maybe I can't jump in my car and drive 12 hours any longer. Maybe I have to do this, and I did do that in 4 days rather than in one day. That's just an example, and I don't plan to do that, but uh,
So, John, we talked early on about you having a hard time accepting being a hero. And then we talked of also, about being that being reflected to you. Was it by your niece who reflected you as a superhero?
my daughter,
Your daughter reflected that to you, and you still had a hard time with the idea. In week 11, which is dubbed the resurrection, you wrote, you've successfully completed the hero's journey, and you recognized courage and noble qualities, and you said, I can humbly accept I am a hero. I declare I'm a quiet hero. I feel grounded and wise. Talk to me about that feeling of recognition.
well, that's, I guess, maybe another demon that I haven't quite come to grips with yet, is that my tendency is to step out of the spotlight, not to be the center of attention, not to do anything that's going to put me apart from everybody else and then sort of put me on a pedestal. I can't really go too much with that right now.
That's okay.
But That's probably why it took me till the very end of week 11 to be able to say, well, maybe my daughter's, or the definition of which I looked up and was the actual real definition of a hero, and the qualities they attribute to it are ones that I could own. Do I deserve that? I had to go through that, Robert. Do I deserve to call myself a hero? Do I deserve to own these qualities? And internally, there was a fight. There was that demons versus my angels again. And it was the angels that finally whispered in my ear in the left ear and said, yeah, you can accept that. You are. But I have to keep reinforcing that for myself.
Sure.
So every day when I wake up and maybe I'm stiff or I can't get up, get moving as quickly as I'd like to, I have to keep reminding myself that, John, you're really a hero in all this. And that's not a bad thing to do every day.
That's right. It takes effort, right? I mean, it's a show. It's not a one-time, put it on your mantle, done with it forever. Now what do I do, right? It's a process, and it's going to evolve, just like life is always changing. And that's one of the things we invoke in improv, and it also fits with the hero's journey. Is today's the day.
Today's the day. Yeah.
Right. What does that phrase mean to you, and how does that help you maybe get your daily dose, as it were?
Well, it keeps me, when I really are looking at today's the day, I focus on what's going to happen today. It's not what are all the bad things that could happen. I could get hit by a car while I'm walking down the road, my daily walk. But instead, I look at the good things, like my grandchildren are going to arrive today, the 4th of July weekend, and today's the day they're coming. So that's a good thing.
That's a great thing.
Keeps me focused on what's going to happen today. That's going to be positive for me.
Right. So looking forward, you've completed, a journey through improvisation that was kind of unlikely, not only as an individual class, but within an ensemble, like you said, and now this writing program that included some improvisational elements that, again, you attribute, and I humbly thank you for that, to doing some of the most meaningful writing you've done of self-exploration and identity. What's next for you within this process? How do you take this energy you've built, this strength and this self-awareness, and do more with it, maybe for you and for the community, which you're clearly involved in?
Well, primarily, I keep tapping in every Tuesday morning, or for me, Tuesday afternoon, into Jam for Joy, which is an hour of just pure fun for me. It's the way I type directly back into that energy, your energy as well as the ensemble's energy. I feel like there's several people in that group that I've gotten to know pretty well through either the 6-week clinical trial and or the day one experience, who I feel like, even though I may probably never meet them personally, I feel like, quite connected to them. And in fact, I'm hoping I do get to meet some of them personally, because I plan to come to the December 5th in Austin. That's my plan anyway.
Right. The festival in Texas, the Axe Festival in Texas. We look forward to that. Let me ask you, you've been involved with the Parkinsons community, certainly at the University of Maryland, and why was that important for you, even before these programs, you were doing these things, to not only be someone who was, receiving the benefit of whatever the symposiums were, the speakers were, the latest information, but someone who would actively seek out and try to find more for your community? Why was that important for you to be that type of leader?
It felt, or it feels, when I stop and think about that, rather empty to just be sitting here in my house all by myself and sort of maybe taking in some information over Zoom or however it should be done without, or say pre-Zoom, pre-COVID days, just by taking rather than giving. It's that giving back that's really fulfilling for me. It's like, and believe me, there are people that put in more energy in this symposium than I do. They put a lot more in, but for someone in my position, I think at my stage in life, I'm doing quite a bit. I'm participating in that symposium and the planning for it, and getting you to come as our keynote speaker this October, which I'm really looking forward to. And prior to all this, there was a couple of classes I went to when we were still over in the DC side of Maryland, or the Chesapeake Bay here. And I had a fitness class that I went to, a boxing fitness class. It was different than rock steady, but it was being part of a community. Being part of some community has always been important to me. I mean, I can be, I'm a good member. I'm a good leader member. I don't want to be the one in charge, but I'll work underneath someone that's in charge to help, I can implement a vision.
That sounds like a first follower type of mentality. Do you remember that video with the lone nut and the first follower?
I don't recall the video, but I know that the first follower is Susan, and she's done a marvelous job of it.
Susan, as you mentioned off the top, is that type of person. Like you mentioned, it's servant leadership, I think, is what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
That you don't have to be out in front. You certainly don't have to be making everything happen. However, you recognize something that sounds good to you and you're ready to contribute to it. Does that sound pretty reasonable?
It does.
Yeah. And I see that very strongly in everything you do. John, is there anything more you want to say about the day one process, perhaps for somebody who might be considering it, what might be good for them? Not only as a person for Parkinson's, I can note this too, but we noted we had Kelly, our first care partner, involved too, that this is a community type of thing. What type of encouragement maybe would you lend to someone who might want to be part of this?
I would say anybody's considering that the day one absolutely is a game changer. I see this as for me anyway, it was something that has really changed my whole perspective because during the COVID period, when all we had was Zoom to connect with people, things got a little lonely. Feel you're reaching out to people, but you're never really quite getting them, or they're not getting you. And yet with this, even though it was all on Zoom and all remote, this my experience with the entire Improv day one clinical trial process has just been of really reaching out and grabbing somebody's hand and be able to shake their hand. And it just has been such a valuable piece for me, Robert, that I would really recommend it for anybody. And I'll say that too, it's probably, I looked at this, I probably have lived longer with this diagnosis than most of the people in the class, not all, but most. So it's fairly well along the path for me. I'm also probably older than almost anybody else in the day one program. I'm going to be 77 in December. But it's like, I'm not too old for this, or I'm not too far down the path for this. I can gain a lot of this. And the more I put out, the more I'll get from it. And that's what I felt I got from day one. And I got it, from you. I got it from all the other participants. I got it from the structure of the program. I just think it's a marvelous program. I would think anybody that has the opportunity to take it, it's a blessing you'll never regret.
Well, thanks so much, John. I really appreciate your words, and not just your words, but your involvement. You bring yourself, and I'll note that not only with your writing, but with your improvisation, you bring your full self. And that, that thing you mentioned about being reserved or isolated somewhat, it is my greatest joy to see some of that relieved from you so that you can explore and say yes and to sometimes some crazy things we do and we laugh a lot about within the improv space. And that courage leads to courage to make other decisions, so you're a shining light and an example of how to play.
Say one more thing, because I'm looking at it in Zoom side by side here. And I didn't really plan it this way, but I noticed that the shirt that I did choose the shirt this morning because it was a bright shirt, but against the green walls in the background, it really jumps out. And I would say, you may not be able to see it in my face because my face has become somewhat immobile, but there's so much energy here that's just leaping out. And I hope that the people who choose to watch this segment feel that energy and feel that, feel the love that I have for you as somebody who can take this program.
It's reciprocated. The love I have for you is here as well. Thank you so much, John. I'll see you at the Jam for Joy. And in the meantime, enjoy your holiday weekend and your grandchildren.
And same to you.
All right. You take care.